one of the reasons why you've survived and outperformed, I think, over so many years is that you very consciously have this consistent investment approach that's built around 3 steps. And so when you founded your firm, Disciplined Growth Investors, back in, I think, 97, you wrote this down. I wondered if you could just take us through those 3 steps, because in a way, it's a very practical application of these kind of financial laws of gravity. It'll help us explain how you take advantage of those laws of financial gravity. So the first stage is what?
So the first stage is understanding what you own. Again, let's parse this out. Let's not have our analysts look at a company and already start thinking about building a forecast, because you're going to skip the other steps. So what's executive compensation like? What is, how do they make money? What kind of business do they have? Okay. What are their margins? How good are they? All those kind of things. And if you can't figure out how they make money, leave it for somebody else. I mean, there's a basic humility in saying, the saved us with Enron. We looked when Enron hit $10 a share on its way to zero, because it looked like an interesting business. We looked at it. The financial statement was so complicated. We just threw our hands up and said, we can't understand this one. We'll let somebody else have it. So the idea is, this isn't a forecasting effort. That comes next. This is an understanding effort. Can we figure out how they do business? And,
Okay.
are they good at what they do? Yada, yada.
So step 1, you're analyzing the company, researching the business very thoroughly, seeing how it operates, trying to figure out what the competitive advantage is. So you're starting with the facts. Step 2 is much more about building a really detailed financial model. Can you talk to us about that, what you're doing there?
Yeah, sure. And that's where we spend the group time on the model. Okay. And we've gotten, it's not proprietary, but it's close, because we have a model that it's interactive. So we'll say, well, what if you got them growing at 9%? What if they grow at 11? Or what if their margins do this or that? We can play with all kinds of different assumptions there, right? And it's a very granular model. We build it up typically product line by product line. And we do a lot of visualization, like, how big is their addressable market? What's the competitive landscape? All those kind of things. So we're trying to look at this thing. And I would say in our process, we spend in the group meetings, we spend 90% of the time with that. We're trying to get as clear a picture as we can, as achievable picture of what it's going to look like in 7 years. Okay. And people have said, you guys look like a private equity firm. And I said, yeah, but we charge a lot lower fees. But that's our, by the way, we lose a lot of companies to private equity firms, and because they're looking at probably the same data we're looking at. And so that's the continue to try to refine that.
So stage 2 is constructing this detailed financial model where basically you're estimating what the earnings are likely to be in 7 years' time.
Yeah.
And then stage 3, this is where you're calculating your expected return.
Yeah,
right?
that's all.
Can you explain what you're doing and why you have these specific hurdles for small caps and mid caps, which are the 2 areas you focus on?
Yeah, we use, so the last step is you simply look at the price of the market value of the company, and you figure out the future market value. You say, okay, working assumption, not unfair, is that over time, the stock market's a weighing machine. Short term, it's a voting machine. So intrinsic value and stock price tend to true up over time. Okay, maybe not perfectly, but tend to true up that way. So the last step is to say, okay, the stock's here. We think, it's going to be worth something in the future. In the mids, and this is a key point that I'd like to make, we need a 12% higher annual compound return to buy a mid-cap company, 12% or higher. We need 15 or higher for smalls because it's riskier. Okay, that's why we put that in there. Now, why 12? There's nothing magic about that, except here's a working assumption. If we do 12% for you, you're probably going to keep us. Okay. If we do 6, you're probably going to fire us. We've priced our fees off that, by the way. If we do 15 in smalls, we're going to be a superstar. And in fact, over our history through, I think last month, we were, about 12 on our mids, almost dead, in 27 years, which is kind of amazing when you think about publishing that. it leaves us vulnerable. If the market's going to do 15 for 3 to 5 years, we're probably going to, get some heat from customers, step it up if we're doing 12. But what it does do, it's very simple. It's very straightforward. We've used the same hurdle rate since we started. No debate about it. So it's just a judgment call.
But this is important for a couple of reasons. One of which is it's this repeatable process, right? This consistent adherence to a process where you're saying, I'm not going to take valuation risk by overpaying for these stocks, because then the expected return just doesn't justify the amount of risk that we're taking.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, just think about the clarity you have. It's all against the hurdle rate, right? So we had stocks in 21 that had a negative expected return over the next 7 years, where those were, largely sold. So it gives you clarity. It also, in 08, where we showed a 25% plus expected return, we said, hey, you got to own them. So you build time series in there. So just to play it where it is today, we entered this sell-off at the end of last year. We had about a 14% expected return on our mids. With the down market, we're pushing 20, which is not as high as 08, but really high. We're all in because it's just too good a return. So it gives you that clarity. We're not debating like, oh, interest rates are up. Should we raise the hurdle rate to 15 because rates are up? I don't think so. Every time you introduce some other variable into a model, you have a whole debate and everybody gets confused. We think 12 is a good number.
There's something else that you mentioned, Fred, in passing there about the truing up process. And I think it's really important to sort of dwell on this for a moment, because it's one of those really profoundly fundamental insights into investing. And you once said, I'll quote you said, there are two sources of return for a stock. One is the growth in intrinsic value. The other is the truing up between where the stock is and where the company value is. And the timing on the truing up, the second part of the return, is completely random. That has some really profound implications, right? So this gets back to the idea of the market being a weighing machine in the long run. But can you also talk about the importance of patience, given the fact that you have no idea when that truing up is going to happen?
I'm working on a piece right now, William, on navigating bear markets, because, I've been through 9 of these, 2 giant ones and a bunch of doozies like this one. And you always get late in it whenever we are. I don't know where we are in this one. You wonder, is it ever going to, when does value kick in? And Ben Graham says that's one of the mysteries. In 1955, I think he was testifying to Congress, and they said, what turns bear markets? And he said, that's one of the mysteries of our business. Eventually value takes over and it turns. But there's never a green light that comes on and says, okay, kiddies, it's time to come in the pool. There's no free lunch on this stuff. And I think one of the hardest parts about what we do is the fact that we do not have control over when the intrinsic value and the stock price begin to true up, because you can go for several years and have that happen. And it is just, so what you try to do is, one of the great things I learned from Buffett is he's a teacher. He's always teaching. He's just incredible at how he can take complex things and make them simple, right? So we spend a lot of time teaching our customers, educating, exactly what you're saying. Look, we don't know when it trues up. It's going to take patience. It's a terrific company. If you do it enough times, they start to have confidence because they've seen this happen over and over and over again, and so we have a high credibility quotient with our clients. But, at least 1 or 2 or 3 always get restive. When is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm willing to tell people exactly how to do it, knowing how hard it is, because you don't have any control over it. And this idea of, we've been toying around with uncertainty versus risk. And, there are things and what you can control and can't control. You can control the quality of your work. You can control what you want to pay for something, but you can't control when intrinsic value and stock price begin to true up in either direction. And boy, that's a hard one.
But knowing these fundamental laws of financial gravity as a pretty good start. But as you say, the execution is excruciatingly difficult because all of the fear, all of the uncertainty, all of the institutional pressures from clients who can leave you and fire you, your own emotions. I mean, there are so many things that come to play here. But the fact that you know these laws of gravity is a really helpful start. And your average holding period for stocks is the best part of 11 years. So,
Right.
so you're allowing time for this force of gravity to play out.
Every way I can, I try to teach clients, like, I'm getting calls, what do you think about the market next year? I say, I have no idea. I can't imply that I know what's going to happen next year. I might have an opinion, but I got about a 50-50 chance of being right. But I just try to, everything I do, and everybody here keeps trying to say, we don't know what's going to happen over the next 6 to 12 months. We don't know. We know we have great stuff.
So is the key, Fred, to focus on what is knowable, which is the intrinsic value and what you think it's going to be in 7 years, which is not super knowable, but somewhat.
But it's absolutely knowable to avoid valuation risk. It is absolutely knowable. That, I would say to you that just, having said P ratios are not a super leading edge, but they're not unimportant, okay? Or price of sales, you can do back of the envelope. We're not experts in Tesla, but we did back of the envelope calculations. It's an auto company, gave them margins and all that stuff, looked at the auto business, and you can do rough analysis and you can kind of figure out what it's worth. So you can know how well priced your portfolio is. You can know that. But there are lots of things you cannot know. I think what you have to do on stuff you don't know is live your life carefully enough so if you're wrong on that, you can survive.
That's a very profoundly important point.
It is.
You wrote to me the other day, I think we may have uncovered the greatest risk manager of all time, the climber in the documentary Free Solo. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about this guy, Alex Honnold, who is a master of, I don't know how many of our listeners have watched the movie. There's a great documentary called Free Solo that's about this guy, Alex Honnold, who decides to climb, I think it's El Capitan, so this 3,000 or so foot sheer granite cliff. I mean, it gave me a heart attack just watching the thing. Can you talk about what you can learn from someone like Honnold about dealing with uncertainty, dealing with risk, mitigating risk in a really intelligent, thoughtful way, since we don't know what can happen or what will happen? We can guess what can happen, but we don't know what will happen.
Did you watch the documentary?
Yeah, and then yesterday I watched something about the filming of the documentary, which is terrifying in its own right. And one of the things that the cameraman said while making the film is that they had to record part of it with remote cameras because he said he didn't want them to see him die because they were friends of his. Okay. So during the most dangerous bit, they actually had to set up remote cameras.
Oh my God. Okay. So Rob is he's spearheading the piece on risk. This has been in our hands for years, right? We, this idea of trying to get better and I really believe if you really want to learn something well, teach it, and so the teacher always learns the most. And so he writes this thing on.
This is Rob Nikoski, who's your
So he writes this.
Chief Investment Officer.
He starts with Free Solo, and I freak out about it because I'm going, wait, we're not talking about falling off cliffs here. But as I started thinking about it more and more, and about a month ago, I called Rob up and I said, I think I'm not looking at this right. This guy was one of the greatest risk managers of all time. And we need to look at it. I need to look at it differently and say, my goodness, he took this thing with a binary outcome and he made it. And there were 1,000 little threads to make that. So this is really deep stuff, but what this has to do with is risk mitigation. Okay. And what's in your control and what's not in your control. Okay. And so what he did is he climbed it many times. He was a very experienced climber. He was physically fit. And he practiced those moves with a rope over and over again, right? Now, he also, as part of the thing, one of the things that struck me as so profound in the whole thing is, I don't know if you remember in the movie, he was going to climb and he got partway up and said, this isn't right. And he went back down again. I don't know if you remember that. And I remember thinking,
I'd forgotten that. Yeah.
I thought, oh my goodness gracious, this guy, he's got the risk meter going in his head. He's not ready. It's not right. And he knows that this isn't the right day. And just think of the humiliation he must have felt and the sense of deflation, because you don't just show up when he's having a climate. You build to it. You're all fired up. You start up there and he gets partway up and goes, oh, not right. Climbs back down.
It's interesting also, Fred, I saw an extraordinary video of him last night where he was teaching a famous Scandinavian climber to free climb. And he said to the guy, when you get stuck, just be patient and take the time to figure it out. He said, you get in trouble when you're in a hurry. So when you can't figure out how to get out of it, just pause, be patient, and give yourself time to figure it out. And and he's talked about not letting your emotions spiral out of control when you were stuck. And so there's a kind of an incredible ability to get his ego under control.
It's astounding. It's just you should, by the way, you should try to get him on your podcast.
That would be great. Yeah, he's a fascinating guy.
Well, because if you look, he had a binary outcome, but he also had the ability to practice over and over again. He climbed it, right? And he was he stacked a lot of things in his favor. It doesn't guarantee that he didn't fall, but boy, he sure did a lot of risk mitigation. He also, there is another idea that we're debating, and that is, Buffett said this many times. So it is possible to get the market return. You can buy an index, an S&P 500 index fund. Anybody can do it. When you try to get an excess return, the field gets really narrow, and it becomes all about process and implementation and the ability to take intelligent risk if you're going to do superior results. Because if you try to do superior, you may end up with inferior results. Okay. So this kid, had the potential to rise to the top of this, but he had to really do risk mitigation to make it. And it's true investing. To as you move up the food chain, as your performance gets better, you better really manage the risk, because it'll kill you. I'm still turning my head over on his comment about be patient. It's true investing. We have I went to flight school years ago, and one of the buzzwords was one of the things you train for in flight school is you train crews, which is kind of interesting, but you train when stuff goes wrong, a red light on the cockpit starts blinking. Well, first thing you do is look at it, right? And it's not fun, right? Something's going wrong, right? But there's a saying, wind the clock. Just let it blink. Just wind the clock. Okay. Because you don't want to overreact. It rarely is it life-threatening, the first part. You can make it life-threatening. One of the extreme examples, and it's happened in the past, is you're lifting off in a 2-engine plane, right? And just as the plane hits a certain speed, you rotate, you lift off, your engine quits. So fly the plane, wind the clock, fly it to a safe altitude and deal with it. Even if you have an engine fire, deal with it when you get to altitude. Okay. Why would you do that? Because you don't want the guy in the right seat to reach over and pull the wrong lever and cut the power off to the good engine. That's happened. So excitement in the cockpit, I call it fast hands. I don't like to fly with guys with fast hands because they'll push the wrong button. That's a bad idea, flying. So I love his advice. When you get in a jam, slow down, think about it. You're safe where you are right now. And it's true investing. Think about it. Think about it. You don't ever have to be in a rush to lose money. You really don't. And, Buffett always talks about waiting for the fat pitch to come over the plate. Just wait. There'll be other ones coming. Just slow down. It's a really good way to think about it. Just slow down.
Honnold also used a very interesting phrase where he said he did enough preparation so he could step outside his fear.
Ooh,
so that's
wow.
This was in another video of his. And he had trained for, I think, 2 years weighing whether to attempt this climb that he ends up doing in something like 3 hours, 57 minutes. I mean, it's very profound, I think. Josh Waitzkin often talks about thematic interconnectedness, right? Where you see something in one field that applies in another field. And there's something about Honnold's ability to control his emotion that's very applicable.
I don't have you talked about that capacity for you in terms of looking at balance sheets as a right-left brain balance. I don't have the capacity to put that risk out of my mind enough. It would impede my ability to execute because I would be thinking about falling. I wouldn't even try to do that because that risk profile is beyond. He had to be able to literally dissect every risk on the way up, different handholds, everything else, all the experience he's had, like you're saying, massive preparation. But it's one of the greatest athletic feats of all time, but it's also maybe the greatest risk management exercise of all time. I started by objecting to have it in there because I thought we don't want to have people thinking about falling off the cliff. But then I made a 180 and we're using the theme from him. And I'm going to take your quote and give it to Rob because we're going to try to get that in there because I think that that is, there's an idea on decisions, and I've said this to many people. So let's say there's three kinds of decisions: A decisions, B decisions, and C decisions. A are great decisions, make them. C are bad decisions, avoid them. Where people spend way too much time is on B decisions. They try to make them before they either turn into an A or a C. So if it's a B decision, don't do anything with it. It's just a B decision. Don't waste time on it. See what happens. It'll either migrate to C or migrate to A. That's just, so that idea of patience, I think, is, certainly investing, patience, but patience on decisions. Sure. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I talk about this in writing about Ed Thorpe in the introduction to my book, where he talks about part of rationality being suspending judgment. And then my friend Gillian Zoe Siegel, who wrote about Buffett in her book, Getting There, I remember her quoting Warren saying, you can always tell people to go to hell tomorrow. I think he used slightly cruder words than that. But again, it's the ability to just wait. Not to be pushed into action prematurely.
Just wait. There's real value in that.